In ancient Rome, buying a person was about as normal as buying bread. The streets reeked of olive oil, sweat, and commissand behind every coin flip was a life on the line. Walking through a Roman slave market was like scrolling through Amazon, except the products had price tags hanging from their necks. Every body was a commodity, every breath an investment, and those prices, they swung harder than a sword in the arena. A basic slave might go for 500 denarii. On a good day, still a fortune for most Romans. But nothing stayed stable for long. When Roman legions marched home dragging prisoners of war behind them, the markets flooded, supply exploded, prices crashed. Traders who had just spent their savings on prime stock watched their investments tank overnight. Then peace would creep back in, and suddenly, demand outpaced supply again. Prices shot sky high, and a once cheap laborer became a luxury. Rome's economy turned human lives into a market cycle. More victories meant cheaper slaves. Peace meant scarcity and skyrocketing prices. Even the location changed the math. Someone worth 800 denarii in a remote frontier could fetch 10 times that in the capital. In Rome, wealth meant appetite, and appetite meant bidding wars. The rich wanted cooks, tutors, and entertainers. The poor dreamed of owning even one person to make life easier, but that dream usually stayed out of reach. A healthy adult slave cost around 1,000 denarii, roughly a year's pay for a professional soldier. Imagine working 12 months straight just to buy another human being. A modest home in the city might cost the same. Romans literally had to choose between property and people. The wealthy flaunted both. The poor gawked like window shoppers outside a chariot dealership, knowing they'd never step inside. Elderly or disabled slaves went cheap, 50 to 100 denarii, sold like broken tools. Meanwhile, the young, strong, and skilled sold for more than some houses. It was brutal math. Human worth boiled down to age, strength, and usefulness. The market didn't care about ethics. A person was just another form of capital. The top-tier slaves were a different world entirely. Skilled professionals, teachers, physicians, artists sold for prices that would make senators sweat. A Greek tutor, 5 to 15,000 denarii. Doctors up to 20,000. And the musicians, the entertainers, the beautiful young people sold for obscene sums, 30, 50, sometimes 100,000 denarii. Romans didn't even pretend to hide it. Beauty and talent were luxury commodities. Knowledge too had a price tag. A scholar once sold for 175,000 denarii, more than most citizens could earn in 10 lifetimes. Craft workers filled the middle ranks, blacksmiths, jewelers, carpenters fetching 3 to 6,000 depending on skill. Each was a walking business plan. Buy one, and they could train others or generate income. Rome's elite understood they weren't buying people, they were buying productivity, status, and profit. But all that depended on what the buyer actually got. And that's where things got darkly meticulous. At the markets, naked bodies stood in rows on wooden platforms, displayed for inspection. Buyers examined them the way one might inspect horses, checking teeth, testing muscles, scanning for scars or disease. Each wore a tablet around their neck listing price, skills, and flaws. Strong worker, aged, good with vineyards, 3,000 denarii. Sometimes there were warnings. Tends to run away. Has bitten before. The richer the buyer, the longer the sign, like resumes for sale. Some dealers even offered written guarantees. If your purchase dropped dead within 6 months due to hidden illness, you could get a partial refund. They literally had return policies for people. Buyers could make the enslaved perform on the spot, play an instrument, recite poetry, demonstrate a spell, naked, terrified, and desperate to prove their worth. Certain markets became known for quality stock, catering to Rome's most elite clientele. Location, connections, and reputation dictated everything. To Romans, this wasn't grotesque, it was normal. Families brought children along as if it were a day at the fair. Kids learned to evaluate human lives before they learned math. Some traders even offered personal shopping services for regular clients, custom human portfolios for the wealthy. But what about the ones who escaped that world? Some did. A few slaves earned or bought their freedom. A process called man. They worked side jobs, saved coins, and eventually purchased themselves back, 1 denarius at a time. Others were freed in wills or ceremonies. Sometimes after saving their master's life, for catching them in a generous mood after too much wine. Freedom, though, came with fine print. Freedmen could own property and start businesses, but they couldn't vote or hold major offices. They were free, but never equals. Many became rich running shops, trading goods, even owning slaves themselves. The irony was thicker than Roman marble. A man once sold on the block could end up owning another standing there by the height of the empire. As many as 1 in 10 Romans was a freedman caught in that limbo between bondage and privilege. Some even rose to advise emperors, proving that talent and intellect could bend class barriers, but never truly break them. Rome built its empire on human commerce. They calculated suffering, auctioned potential, and sold ambition by the pound. Even freedom had a price, and in the end, the market that measured worth in denarii never stopped counting. Skilled bodies lived in a different price universe. A Greek tutor could drain 5 to 15,000 denarii from a patrician purse. Because learning, especially Greek learning, signaled class. Physicians climbed higher, 20,000 for steady hands that set bones and mixed remedies. Musicians and entertainers turned dinner parties into status theater. A gifted lyre player touched 10,000, and the darkest tier youthful beauty bought 4. Pleasure rocketed to 30, 50, even 100,000. Rome didn't whisper about it. The elite treated desire like fine art and paid accordingly. Craftmasters sat in the middle lanes. Blacksmiths, carpenters, jewelers, 3 to 6,000 for men and women who could earn, teach, and replicate themselves. Each purchase was a business plan in sandals. Add skill, charm, or specialized knowledge, and the numbers blew past rooftops. You weren't just acquiring labor, you were buying time, polish, and social oxygen. Age sculpted price more ruthlessly than any sculptor. A healthy male at 25 prime years, strong lungs, clean teeth might sell for 1,500. The same man at 40 sagged to 800. Children warped the curve. A literate 12-year-old could fetch 2,000 because potential multiplies value. A buyer could mold a lifetime from that small frame. Gender twisted the calculus further. Women's prices rode a brutal axis of skill and appearance. A talented healer or musician soared. Beauty doubled the bid. It wasn't fair. It wasn't meant to be. Condition decided everything. Scars, limps, bad teeth, fever each flaw, shaved coins off the slate. Buyers leaned in, checked gums, traced old wounds with clinical detachment. For craftsmen, age could be forgiven if the hands still remembered. For field hands, the body was the contract. Senators compared people like livestock, balancing youth against skill, stamina against specialty, and counting the years of service left like tally marks on a wax tablet. War rewrote the market whenever it wanted. Caesar's sweep through Gaul poured captives into Italy until prices cratered. Dealers complained, imagined bellyaching because people were too cheap. Logistics turned monstrous. Marching chains across provinces. Feeding them, keeping them from bolting. Moving inventory to ports and plazas. Peace flipped the script. Supply shrank. Prices rebounded. That bargain Gaulish farmhand, bought during conquest, suddenly became a windfall to replace. Investors tracked campaigns like stock tickers. Victories in Spain, buy the dip. Quiet frontiers, expect a squeeze. Generals did the math, Gloryland. And the payday of captives baked into strategy. All of it ran inside a pen of rules-thin fences. But fences nonetheless. Kidnapping the freeborn and selling them, off limits, at least on parchment. Citizens were supposed to be untouchable. Yet poverty cut loopholes. A father drowning in debt, selling a child. A starving man selling himself. Honesty in sales was, technically, mandatory. Hide disease or lie about age and you could face fines, exile, or a career-ending ban from the good markets. So the trade split. Respectable dealers kept ledgers and warranties. The back alleys sold what couldn't pass inspection: stolen people. The sick, the desperate, no paperwork, no promises. Just risk priced, like a discount. Step into the marketplace, and the theater hits like heat. Wooden platforms, naked bodies, tablets dangling from throats listing skills, defects, and the opening bid. Buyers circle, prod, demand demonstrations. A musician is told to play. A would-be tutor recites lines of Homer while trying not to shake. Premium venues cultivate premium reputations. Wealthy households return to favored stalls. Dealers memorize tastes. It's personal shopping, grotesquely intimate. And yet, not every story ended on a platform. Manumission freedom through the machine like a thin silver wire. A master might free someone in a will, at a shrine, or during a flush of generosity. Many bought themselves back, coin by coin, working side jobs, bargaining down a price that could equal their market value. A skilled steward might need 10,000 denarii to step out of bondage. Another might catch look heroic service. A dying patron, a well-timed plea. Freedom, however, came graded. A freedman could own property, open a shop, marry, and make real money. Voting high office, not for them. The cap they wore marked their past, even as their ledgers fattened. Some became wealthy enough to spark envy running shipping ventures, dye works, bathhouses, then turned around and bought slaves of their own. Irony wasn't just thick, it was structural. Their children could climb higher, sometimes into full citizenship, but the climb was long and the ceilings were reinforced by custom. By the empire's peak, freedmen filled Rome's streets and counting houses. A tenth of the population, by some reckonings, no longer property, not quite peers. A few rose further, advising emperors from rooms that echoed with decisions shaping the world. They navigated politics with minds honed by survival, yet the memory of platforms and tablets never evaporated. Freedom cost money. Equality never cleared escrow. This was Rome's arithmetic. Victories pushed prices down. Peace lifted them. Beauty multiplied value. Scars divided it. Youth added years. Illness subtracted futures. Markets hummed. Laws pretended. Back alleys whispered, and families strolled past platforms, as if they were stalls of figs and fish. The empire didn't just conquer territory. It learned to monetize human breath, calculating, hedging, speculating until even liberation became a line item, and the ledgers outlived the lives they measured. The Roman slave market was a spectacle, not hidden, not hushed, but staged in broad daylight. Walk through one of those plazas, and you'd smell sweat, oil, fear, and fresh sawdust. The air buzzed with shouts, coin clinks, and the soft shuffle of chained ankles. Naked bodies lined wooden platforms, skin shining under the Mediterranean sun, each with a tag hanging from their neck. It wasn't a name, it was a price, a summary, a warning. Strong worker, age 25, vineyard trained, 3,000 denarii, sometimes tends to run, bites when cornered. It was commerce stripped of humanity, precision-engineered cruelty disguised as normal life. Buyers didn't whisper. They called out bids like traders on a stock floor. They prodded arms, pried mouths open, pressed fingers against ribs, testing for health, for potential, for flaws. A few even made their merchandise perform. A musician forced to play. A scholar ordered to recite. A young woman told to dance. A trained Greek tutor might stand under the same sun as a terrified farmhand, their worth separated by 10,000 coins. Around them, citizens shopped with the same focus they brought to pottery or bread. Children tugged at their parents' tunics, learning early how to measure a human like a horse. And somehow, it all ran on rules, thin lines between legal and forbidden, that Romans thought proved their civility. You couldn't enslave a Roman citizen, at least not officially. Selling someone else's child without consent, illegal. Concealing illness, or lying about age, grounds for lawsuits. Buyers could demand refunds if their purchase dropped dead within days. A slave collapses from fever 3 nights after sale. Take the dealer to court. Rome had warranty policies for human lives. But where there are rules, there are shadows. The unofficial markets worked behind taverns and near the docks. No questions, no paperwork, no limits. Sick, stolen, or condemned people went cheap. No refunds, no oversight, only risk. Traders called it opportunity. Buyers called it bargain hunting. The empire called it none of its concern. The irony cut deeper than the chains. Rome built an entire legal system to protect the buyer, not the bot. The same senators who debated morality over dinner passed laws about refund policies for slaves, then walked past chained families the next morning without blinking. They treated people like livestock, but obsessed over paperwork like accountants. Civilization and cruelty coexisted in perfect balance, each feeding the other. Yet in the cracks of that machinery, freedom flickered. Manumission, the official word for release, became a strange, narrow path out. Some masters freed slaves in their wills. Others did it as gestures of piety, hoping the gods noticed. But most freedom was earned, bought at full price by the enslaved themselves. Imagine saving coins for years, working extra hours, enduring beatings and humiliation just to hand your master your life's savings, to buy yourself. The ultimate transaction. Freedom, though, didn't mean equality. Freedmen entered a twilight world between bondage and citizenship. They could own property, marry, even run businesses, but politics and power stayed locked behind invisible walls. Still, some climbed anyway. Freedmen ran trade routes, managed estates, and counted coins for emperors. Their children, if lucky, could become citizens. And a few, those rare shrewd iron-willed, few even found themselves advising the same rulers, who once might have bought them. By the height of the empire, freedmen made up roughly 1 in 10 Romans. They filled the city's shops, baths, and workshops, the invisible middle class that kept Rome alive. They wore caps marking their status, half badge, half scar. Some grew rich, even arrogant, buying slaves of their own and decorating homes with frescoes that looked suspiciously like the ones they once cleaned. The irony didn't bother them. Rome didn't question contradiction, it celebrated it. Every number told a story. A field worker for 500 denarii, a doctor for 20,000, a scholar for 175,000. An empire whose economy breathed in human rhythm. When armies marched, prices plunged. When peace settled, prices climbed. Every victory, every treaty, every lull between wars rippled through the markets like stock waves. Human life became a currency, volatile, profitable, expendable. And maybe that's what made Rome so terrifyingly efficient. They didn't just conquer lands, they quantified them. Every field, every tool, every body had value measured in silver. It was all one ledger, a colossal, cold calculation that ran on blood, brilliance, and belief. And through it all, the markets hummed, coins rang, chains rattled, and beneath the empire's marble pride lay the sound that built it, the steady, rhythmic counting of lives being bought and sold, in the heart of Rome. Those markets weren't hidden away, they were the empire's open secret, a spectacle draped in sunlight and indifference. Rows of wooden scaffolds lined the squares, each creaking under the weight of chained bodies. The crowd moved like a tide, merchants, senators, housewives, even children browsing lives the way we scroll through listings today. The noise was relentless. The bark of auctioneers, the clatter of coins, the faint sobbing that nobody dared to acknowledge. Every person stood tagged and categorized. Strong backs, soft faces, sharp minds, all reduced to bullet points on a wooden placard. Age 25, literate, loyal, 3,000 denarii, prone to escape, minor limp, discounted. It was business, not brutality. At least that's what the Romans told themselves. The wealthiest buyers demanded demonstrations. A musician strumming trembling notes under a blazing sky. A scholar translating a verse of Homer while trembling on display. A teacher, a craftsman, a child, all standing on auction blocks like tools arranged for inspection. Yet Rome believed itself moral, because it had rules. No freeborn citizen could be sold. Traders had to declare a person's health, age, and defects. Buyers could return damaged goods. Fraud, lying about illness or age, was punished with fines or exile. The empire even had lawyers who specialized in human transactions. But every law written in marble had a shadow scratched in dust. Desperate families sold children to survive. Debtors sold themselves to clear accounts. Officials looked the other way when Bacchali auctions turned profits. Justice was a coin tossed between hands. The markets fed on empire. Every victory brought floods of captives. Every peace starved the trade. When Caesar's legions crushed Gaul, hundreds of thousands of men, women, and children were herded south. Prices plummeted overnight, slaves cheaper than cattle. Traders complained that success was bad for business. They muttered about oversupply, as if they were talking about grain instead of human beings. And when the wars went quiet, prices soared again. Farmers begged for help. Nobles tightened their hold on what they owned. Conquest was Rome's engine, and the people it captured were its fuel. But the machine had another side. The rare stories of escape, of rebirth, manumission. The word meant freedom, bought with labor, loyalty, or sheer luck. Some masters freed their slaves as acts of faith, hoping the gods would notice. Others did it for love, gratitude, or guilt. Many made their captives earn it, hoarding wages for years to buy the one thing they could never replace, themselves. Imagine handing over everything you've saved just to stand empty-handed and free. That's what freedom costs. Yet even when those chains fell, new ones remained woven from class and memory. Freedmen could own land, run shops, marry whom they pleased, but they couldn't vote. They couldn't serve in high office. Their caps marked them as liberated, but not equal. A quiet reminder that Rome never forgot who was once owned. Still, many rose higher than anyone expected. Freedmen ran shipping fleets, managed estates, built fortunes that made old money citizens grind their teeth. Some even owned slaves themselves, completing the circle that had trapped them. The empire didn't just allow irony, it ran on it. By the height of Roman power, freedmen made up a vast portion of the city's population, nearly 1 in 10 souls. They filled the workshops, the counting houses, the public baths. They became the merchants, the middlemen, the machinery behind Rome's daily life. A few climbed even higher, trusted advisors to emperors. Men who had once stood naked on the auction block, now whispering policy into the ears of rulers. They carried their scars quietly, invisible beneath the togas of respectability. Rome measured everything in denarii: grain, stone, silk, and people. The empire turned life itself into arithmetic. Beauty added value. Scars subtracted. Victory flooded the market. Peace dried it up. Every conquest was an economic forecast. Every triumph a stock crash. Slave traders tracked the march of legions, like modern investors watch markets. To Rome, humanity wasn't sacred, was supply and demand. And so the marble city gleamed, polished by hands that would never own a stone of it. The forums thrived on the rhythm of chains, the hum of negotiation, the clink of coins echoing off temple walls. That was the true heartbeat of the empire, not the Senate, not the legions, but the marketplace where freedom had a price, and dignity was sold by the pound. Rome didn't just rule the world, it monetized it, one human life at a time. Picture a bright Roman morning, sunlight spilling over marble columns, the smell of olive oil and iron dust, merchants shouting over one another as coins clatter on stone tables. In the center of it all, the slave market hums like a living machine. A platform creaks under the weight of bodies lying shoulder to shoulder, men, women, children, each stripped of clothes and name alike. A wooden tag dangles from every neck, swaying in the breeze. Not an identity, but an inventory. Age 20, strong build, vineyard worker. Age 12, literate, obedient. The crowd moves closer, their sandals grinding grit into the ground. Buyers don't lower their voices. They prod shoulders, lift chins, check teeth with casual cruelty. A merchant calls for a musician to play, a teacher to quote poetry, a dancer to twirl. The air ripples with the sound of evaluation. Human beings tested like merchandise. Beside the stage, a clerk records transactions in neat Latin cursive, tallying profit as easily as if he were counting sheep. Above him, a banner flaps lazily in the wind. Vanellus, licensed trader. Civilization. Stamped and certified, every rule has its theater. Official markets required paperwork, age, skill, health, origin. If a buyer discovered a hidden defect, he could take the dealer to court and demand repayment. Rome prided itself on fairness, as long as fairness applied only to the man with the money. Illegal trades happened just beyond the walls, back alleys by the Tiber, behind wine stalls and stables. No tags, no taxes, no oversight. Stolen citizens, sick captives, even children snatched from villages changed hands there. Cheap, fast, untraceable. Rome's underworld learned the empire's favorite language, profit. When the legions returned victorious, the markets swelled with new flesh. Caesar's conquest of Gaul dumped 1 million captives into the system. Prices crashed so low that traders complained of losses. Too many people to sell, too few buyers left to care. But peace reversed the tide. When the wars slowed, when the prisons emptied, scarcity pushed prices through the roof. The same men who once bought a farmhand for 200 denarii now paid 10 times that amount. It wasn't morality that drove the market, it was math. Freedom had its own exchange rate. Manumission, the thin thread between bondage and autonomy, was often transactional. A loyal servant could be released in a will, or purchase their liberty outright, coin by coin. Some bought themselves back with the very money they earned for their masters. Others were freed as tokens of piety, mercy, or vanity. But even then, Rome marked its freedmen. They could own land, start shops, marry, build fortunes, yet never step into the Senate or vote in the forum. Their liberty had fine print. A cap on their heads said freed, but their lineage whispered once owned. Still, they built lives out of the cracks. Freedmen became bankers, traders, contractors, the quiet pulse of Rome's economy. They ran bathhouses, shipping fleets, and restaurants, employing citizens who once looked down on them. Some even returned to the markets as buyers, purchasing others to do the work they once endured. The empire didn't punish irony, it perfected it. By the time Rome reached its golden age, freedmen filled every street. 1 in 10 wore the mark of release. Their children could become citizens. Their grandchildren could rise even higher. A few climbed so far they stood beside emperors, advising the same system that once priced their flesh. They moved through marble halls built on the bones of commerce, their voices calm, their memories varied, but never gone. This was Rome's greatest paradox, a civilization obsessed with law, order, and glory, built entirely on the arithmetic of human lives. Victories flooded markets, peace starved them, beauty inflated value, scars deflated it. The empire didn't measure worth in virtue or birthright, but in coin, and as long as the ledger stayed balanced, nobody asked what it cost to keep the marble shining. Beneath that polish, the hum never stopped, the sound of chains, the murmur of bargaining, the rhythm of an empire buying and selling its own humanity. Rome didn't just trade in gold or grain, it traded in people, and for centuries, That trade was the empire's truest mirror, cold, brilliant, and utterly unflinching.